So in this segment, we're going to be talking about how the Tory party have no leg to stand on when it comes to discussing the situation around grooming gangs.
Safeguarding of children's rights. Do you support those?
There's a lot of merit in what is being put forward there. We will have lots of detailed amendments at committee about exactly how it's being implemented. But a lot of this is things that we have brought forward previously, so we do support some of it in principle, yes.
So how come you didn't get it passed when you had a huge majority? How come you didn't get this done? You had years to do it.
You're also planning to add an amendment to the bill to call for a full national statutory inquiry into the grooming scandal.
This is an amendment from what people have said would have killed this bill, would have killed it. So, you know, the idea that they want to protect children is no. They are, in my opinion, on the side of the PDF files.
The last one that your party commissioned took 7 years. It cost hundreds of millions of pounds and reported in 2022. In terms of just really trying to serve the victims and the families involved of this scandal and preventing it from happening again, is the quickest way of doing that, the most effective way of doing that, of having another inquiry that will take years?
So this is an evolving picture, and you're right to say that the inquiry which was set up in 2014 under us, which was much wider, by the way, it was on all forms of child sexual abuse, took a long time to report. But what it did show is that child grooming was...
So you've got this, you did this inquiry that was, you know, much wider, like you said, it's therefore probably much better in terms of, you know, scope and in terms of analysis. So therefore, why would you want a much narrower inquiry now?
Still taking place across the country. The Grooming Gangs Task Force, which was set up as a result of that report in 2023, reported in 2024, and it said that there had been 550 arrests just in that 1 year. 4,000 children were protected as a result of the work of the Gangs Grooming Task Force. We now know that this has taken place in over 50 towns, but we don't know the exact number of victims, the exact number of perpetrators. We don't even know exactly the number of towns that this has taken place in. So we are calling for a time-limited inquiry to look at all of those questions. This will not stop work being done in the meantime to protect victims.
It would do, because another inquiry would require that. No, it would require kind of more new analysis on this. You can't, you know, like governments don't pass laws whilst an inquiry is going on. That's why they didn't pass, you know, the certain laws that would have done more to protect children. That's why they waited, or at least that's what they say they did. It wouldn't make sense to change the laws and do another inquiry, because then you would have to do it again. I don't know, maybe I'm missing something here.
But it is very important that we have this information, and I really hope that Labour MPs will back our calls today for a national inquiry and vote with us later.
I'm just interested to know, you know, in terms of the sort of political point scoring on all of this, you know, why you didn't call for it sooner, if it's truly your belief that the last report didn't do enough. Alexis Jay, who your party commissioned to do the last report, that you just said, you know, was wide-ranging and national, said, I think the time has passed for more inquiries. We've had enough inquiries. The victims and survivors had the courage to come forward and they want action. We've set out what action is required, both locally and nationally, and people should get on with it. I mean, again, I just come back to what's triggered the calls for another national inquiry that might or might not be the right call. But the person you commissioned to do the last report is saying it's time for action that you had 2 years to implement and didn't implement in full the 20 recommendations.
So
I don't think they implemented any of them. So like, they got the Grooming Gangs Task Force. Surely you could do something like set up a task force like that in each kind of major police force. Maybe the grooming kind of cases go to specific experts within a specific police force like that. Maybe that would be an effective way to deal with it.
I will always sit here and say that there is more that could have been done to help support and stop victims of child sexual abuse. No government has done this perfectly, but...
You haven't done well at all, though. That's the point.
What I would say is that we did a huge amount when we were in government. But as I said, this is an evolving picture. More is coming forward the entire time. There's been some excellent work that's been done by journalists, by police forces up and down the country to uncover more of this. There's more that's being done at a local council level as well.
So what more would a new inquiry show you then if this stuff is being dealt with?
We need to bring that together to truly understand what has happened here. This has been one of the biggest national scandals on grooming that we have had in this country. There have been an untold number of children affected. It was 1,400 just in Rotherham. There is much more that needs to be understood about what has happened here, and it is absolutely a legitimate policy argument to be having as to whether the national inquiry is the right thing to do. It is.
But you're saying you want a national inquiry. Now you're saying there's a legitimate conversation to have around this. Either there is, or it's either the right thing to do, or it isn't. Like, Labour actively trying to push a law that will improve things, or push a bill that would improve things for victims. Like, surely you want that to pass, and, you know, if there are still problems, then you hold another inquiry, then you look into things again. Am I wrong again? I don't know.
Unacceptable to smear calls for this as far right.
I mean, the guy you're following into this is far right, first of all. Secondly, is the fact that if it was such a big problem, why were you not calling for this for the last few years whilst you guys have been in charge? It doesn't make sense. So I don't buy her argument, and even Farage is cooking them on a lot of this stuff.
Seems to me there's a deep racist element behind what happened. Now, I might be right, I might be wrong.
That's what Farage does best. You know, he drops a bomb and he runs away.
But doesn't the country deserve a full, open national inquiry? And I'll say this, if the government won't do this, and I do believe there is now overwhelming support on all sides of the political spectrum for this, and Parliament should not be in denial about this, if it doesn't, then we will raise the money at Reform UK and appoint independent arbiters, because we need the truth to be out there. Now I will vote with the amendment that's been put forward by the Leader of the Opposition, although I do note that as Women and Equalities Minister from 2022 to 2024, she didn't meet a single victim of these rapes and never raised the issue once. She
tried to argue that, you know, there was no reason for her to meet any of the victims, despite being the Women's and Equalities Minister. You know, you'd think that would be a very pro-woman thing to do, at least to meet the girls or the women who were the victims of these crimes, no?
Insincere though it may be, I will vote for it, we will vote for it, but I beg those on the other side of the House to think, don't you believe that your constituents need to know the truth about this great evil that has happened in our country?
Even Farage's cooking on this is wild. He's a guy who didn't talk about the grooming gang stuff either until recently.
She's right to say it's one of the worst scandals. It's terrible. That's why I acted on it. Her recently acquired view that it's a scandal, having spent a lot of time on social media over Christmas, not once in 8 years did she stand here and say what she's just said. Not once in 8 years. They didn't act on the recommendations. They want a national inquiry. We had a national inquiry, the J inquiry, the J report. 20 recommendations, not a single one implemented. Not a single one implemented. And she said you can do two things at once. You can't kill the bill this afternoon, wreck that bill, and protect children. There was Mr. Speaker, there was a dreadful case of Sarah Sharif that everybody will remember. This was the girl taken out of school and abused by an abuser. The bill this afternoon fixes that gap. And I know, I'm looking across, I know there are honourable members on the benches opposite who know very well that what's in this bill is necessary, that it's the right thing to do, and that would want to vote for this bill. I urge them to think twice about following this short-sighted, misguided, bandwagon-jumping approach of the non-leadership of the Leader of the Opposition.
You know, this is wild that, you know, Kay Badenoch is so bad. She makes Starmer look good at PMQs. And again, he's right on this. We've had an inquiry. They're the ones who set up the inquiry. It's time to actually implement the findings. That's what the chairperson of the previous inquiry has said. You know, if she wanted to make more money, she'd be like, yeah, let's do another inquiry. I'll lead it if needs be, and she would have got paid out for it. Again, like, the arguments people are making here, like, it don't make sense. The arguments that Kemi Badenoch is making here doesn't make any sense. There's more here, you know.
The Prime Minister has effectively...
You know, I won't... It's just the start bit of her question, really. You know, she calls it the worst thing, you know, tells the Labour MPs not to obey the whip here in this situation, but again, I don't think they're wrong to do that. to actually follow through and push through this bill, because it's what I think it's fundamentally a good thing that people have a mandatory requirement to report child PDF files or children that have been victims. There's a mandatory responsibility to report now, and they could be held liable if they do not. And I think if you do it in such a way that there'll be prison sentences if they do not, then I think there'll be a lot more people who actually have to report on crimes, and they can't hold them back.
Justice Jay's inquiry took 7 years, it cost £200 million and made 20 recommendations in 2022 when you were in government. Why didn't your government immediately implement all 20 recommendations?
Well, we did begin to do that.
But Alexis Jay said your government was weak in implementing some of these recommendations. At the same time, you're saying that this inquiry wasn't sufficient. Your government, your party's government, was the one that set the terms of it and commissioned it £200 million ago, 7 years into the reporting. And again, I ask you the extent to which you point the torchlight on yourselves. If you're waving and screaming about not enough being done by the current government, they've had 6 months in power. They've had 1 week of the light being shone on this by Elon Musk. You had 14 years.
Well, I think we all should reflect upon what we did or didn't do.
Alexis.
Yeah, you should reflect on it. That's the whole point of the question. You're not doing it.
Well, it's not how many? Because Robert Jenry.
Oh, this is for a separate video. We'll cover this. This is the Bridget Phillipson bit that I wanted to cover, because she absolutely takes them to task on this. So here we've got more from Jenrick.
There have been reviews in the past. The Conservative Home Secretary, Theresa May, commissioned 2 reviews from which we learnt a great deal, and some of those recommendations have been implemented. Some will be implemented now by the current government. But what we have learnt more recently is the sheer scale of what is happening. The J review, for example, looked at 6 towns. We now suspect that at least 50 towns have had grooming gangs of this kind. And so it's right that we have a full national inquiry so we can get to the truth, we can ensure that the victims have justice, that we can try to prevent other vulnerable young girls from being in this position again, and the frankly cowardly officials and councillors who have covered this up can also be brought to justice.
But then again, wouldn't the inquiry showed like which specific councillors were involved? Like there was Sophie Ridge who was talking about how come no one's lost their job over this kind of stuff, or how come people haven't been held accountable? Like you guys set up the last inquiry. If an inquiry is meant to actually shine a light on officials who didn't make certain decisions, that's good. How come yours didn't? Or how come yours didn't lead to arrests or jail term or loss of jobs?
Did you ever stand up in the House of Commons and call for a full national public inquiry before Elon Musk waded into this at the weekend and started accusing the Starmer Labour government?
Well, when I was in the Home Office, the Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, took this extremely seriously. It was during that period that we set up the Grooming Gangs Task Force.
OK, but did you ever call for a national public inquiry before Elon Musk got involved?
Yes, I wrote earlier last year about the Grooming Gangs scandal, and I called, for example, for a national inquiry.
But if that was so important to you, why didn't you do that whilst you're in charge?
For the perpetrators to be brought to justice. I said that we should have full life sentences for grooming gang perpetrators.
So why didn't you get that passed as a law then? Why didn't you get the law changed in that regard? The sentencing guideline changed.
I said that
was he Justice Minister at the time, or was he at Justice Minister at any point? I can't remember because they were playing musical chairs with ministerial positions.
Public officials should be prosecuted because no one has yet been prosecuted for misconduct in a public office.
So shouldn't you guys have done that then? Like you're in charge, you set up the inquiry. Surely, if you wanted it to be like Labour actually turning this into a law, if you cared about this, surely you would have done this as well, no?
A blind eye to these terrible offences, and I said that foreign national offenders who've been involved in this should be deported. No ifs, no buts. Get them out of the country so they can't ever do this again, never step foot in the United Kingdom.
I mean, the last point is the only unique point he's made here, but the point is, like, he didn't talk about this until Elon Musk started talking about it. That's about it. Like again, with the Tories, what they don't realise is you were in charge. So all of the problems you're talking about the Labour government not dealing with in this specific instance is on you. And if you want to talk about who's actually caused, who's on the side of PDF files, which they keep talking about, this is Boris Johnson talking about historic child abuse cases.
An awful lot of money, an awful lot of police time now goes into these historic offences and all this malarkey. And, £60 million I saw was being spaffed up the wall on, some investigation into historic child abuse and all this kind of thing. Well, what on earth is that going to do to protect the public now?
So this is one of the things where Labour should be running with this clip and talking about how they don't care about the victims of child abuse. They're talking about money being wasted on looking into historic cases of child abuse and looking at where the system failed, so that in the future that people wouldn't become victims, or at least victims would have a faster track to justice and criminals would be held accountable.
What the people want is to see officers out on the streets doing what they signed up to do.
And his argument is like they should put that money into frontline policing, not into dealing with historic cases of crime, which again doesn't really make sense. But that's his argument. But they should be running with this clip. Because if you want to discuss which party's on the side of PDF files, and we can go the egregious route, and they'll talk about Savile when Keir Starmer was there at the CPS, right? Who were the people taking pictures of Savile when they were Prime Minister? We can discuss that, right? But fundamentally, who are the ones who cooked the judicial system to the point where it takes 4 years? It can take around 4 years for a complex case like an R charge to be heard. Is this lot on the screen right here? 4 years it can take for a case like that to be heard. Who are the ones who hollowed out the CPS? It was this lot, right? Who are the ones who hollowed out the police? Once again, it was this lot, right? So if you want to talk about who's on the side of PDF files and all this stuff, who are the party, point 4, who didn't implement the recommendations of the report into this stuff? It was this lot, right? And so if you want to talk about who's on the side of PDF files, you can try and make the argument it's Labour, but ultimately, if you're going to make the argument that Labour are the ones on the side of the PDF files, you'd have to argue the Tories are even more on their side. And this is Goodall talking to Braverman about her kind of pushing the Pakistani rape gangs thing.
You asserted that perpetrators of child grooming gangs in the UK were almost all British Pakistani. Now, you had to... That was chastised, wasn't it? Entirely rightly, because it was a false claim.
Well, I disagree with the ruling from IPSO, and subsequent reports and data has shown that to be wrong. Lewis, what you're doing is you're zooming out. You're zooming out and you're looking at it from the broad umbrella.
I put it to you again. You may say you disagree with it. What do you disagree about with the IPSO claim that said that...
Can the sound engineer who set up this interview be fired, please?
What you said about the clear majority, or virtually all, of grooming gangs being almost all British Pakistani, when IPSO said to you that what you said was significantly misleading, and the Mail on Sunday had to actually put in a retraction of it. What do you disagree about?
Right. So again, Lewis, so what you're doing is what you always do, which is why you've got
facts?
a lot. You've called it wrong on a lot of political issues in recent months and years. You're fixating on tone. You're fixating on tone, and
I'm not fixating on tone. It's about facts, Suella Braverman.
So
it's about facts.
I've responded to your
said that what you said was significantly misleading.
I've responded to your question.
Yeah, your response was trash, mate. That's why he's pulling back on it, pulling you back on it and saying, look, you've lied. Do you want to address this? And you're like, oh no, you're zooming out too much. It's about, you're arguing over tone. Do you know how stupid you sound like right now?
I disagree with the ruling. They've based it on a flawed set of data.
It's just ridiculous. Even, how do you describe what a gang is in this case as well? That's one of the things you would have to look at. The exact definition you would have. Because if you want to talk about solo perpetrators, in terms of Pakistani people, I think they are within, in terms of the perpetrators as a demographic, as a percentage, they are slightly lower than their population based on per capita of people committing crimes. So their argument makes no sense here. It's a bit, yeah. The reason they're focusing on Asian grooming gangs is because they know that'll cut with the public for the most part. They don't talk about how Savile got away with stuff, and it's partly because the police didn't believe victims, and that there was no mandatory force to really, compel people to report victims. Not report victims. Sorry, to report to the police that people have been victims of crime. Like, if you want to talk about the bigger scandal, you would want to talk about the church or Savile, because he got away with a lot, despite the fact that people did report him to the police. The police did not care, or they were scared to prosecute. And those are the things that I think are really important to look at as well. And so if they want to do, if they pass this legislation and want to do an inquiry into that kind of stuff, I'd be all for that. But I think passing the legislation predominantly is the most important thing, because that's going to protect victims now, which is the important thing. Doing another inquiry, that's going to take another 5 years, right? That's another parliament that's going to come in. And what happens if people complain that inquiry wasn't good enough? You can do another inquiry. It doesn't make sense. The Tories have ultimately face planted on this, and they have no idea what they're talking about, because they're again trying to attack a party. They're trying to attack a party that's just come into charge, when they are the party that should have made these changes. They should have implemented things like this. It's well within their remit to do so, and they chose not to. Whether that's because they're idiots, because they're incompetent, or maybe they are the party of PDF files, who knows? But the fact is, they should have implemented these changes. They didn't. So for them to argue they are the party of law and order is a complete joke. And if you want to hear it again, what they think about child victims and inquiries and things like that, they want to hold another inquiry. This was their guy, by the way, the guy that led their party not long ago.
An awful lot of money, an awful lot of police time now goes into these historic offences and all this malarkey, and 60 million pounds I saw was being spaffed up the wall on some investigation into historic child abuse and all this kind of thing. What on earth is that going to do to protect the public now?
This is what I mean. This is their guy. This is the clip I'd be running with. This is the quote I'd be running with if I were the Labour Party, or anyone looking to kind of deal with the Tories on this in this situation. But anyways, I'm going to leave it there. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Like, comment, share, subscribe. Support the channel on Patreon if you can, and hopefully I'll see you in the next one.